Today, I will explain to you why bombings were a great addition to the Vietnam War. I will only be focusing on one military operation for part 1 of this presentation. Looking back in 1964, President Lyndon Johnson was elected to the office of the President of the United States. After his election, he decided to escalate the war in Vietnam. With that escalation, America commenced one of its most badass military operations, Operation Rolling Thunder. First of all, you need to understand why communism is evil to see why we were fighting the North Vietnamese. Shown on screen here are multiple brutal communist dictators. What communism is the government owns all property and everyone goes into the same class system, meaning everyone gets the same amount of money. What this leads to every single time is mass starvation and authoritarian government control that physically and mentally attacks anyone who disagrees with the way the government is run. Communism has killed 100 million men, women, and children over the past 100 years, along with another 30 million fighting for the spread and containment of communism. Communism is still as hated today. Take, for example, the Cuban protests of this year. People were starving and lacking medicine, so there were protests, riots, and looting to get food and medicine that the Cuban government fails to provide under its policies, as we have seen for over 100 years by now. But communist governments like Cuba continue to promote these policies, knowing how they don't work. Also, let's not forget that a communist killed John F. Kennedy. Now, you know why communism is evil, so let's get into Operation Rolling Thunder. The two masterminds of Rolling Thunder were President Lyndon Johnson and his Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara. They created it, and Johnson approved it on February 13, 1965. LBJ and McNamara stated 4 goals for this operation. The goals were to improve the morale of the South Vietnamese, destroy communication and infrastructure between South and North Vietnam, stop North Vietnamese from entering South Vietnam, and stop North Vietnamese from wanting to pursue into the South. On March 2, 1965, the first bombing occurred. The campaign was supposed to last 8 weeks, but it went on for 3.5 years until November 1st, 1968. Now, let's get into some of the specifics. During Rolling Thunder, America flew over 306,000 bombing attacks against North Vietnam. With all those attacks, you can bet your arse that we dropped a lot of tons of bombs. Just by December 31st, 1967, the Department of Defense announced we dropped 164,000 tons of American bombs on North Vietnam during Rolling Thunder. By the end of the operation, that total went up to over 1 million tons of bombs dropped. That amount of bombs makes this the biggest bombing campaign done in all of American history. The estimated cost of damage inflicted by Rolling Thunder on North Vietnam is around $300 million. That's over $2 billion in today's money. Rolling Thunder was limited to where it could attack due to fear of Chinese and Russian intervention, but in 1967, Johnson increased the areas of where we could bomb, adding important targets onto our list. In total, America killed 20,000 North Vietnamese communists, downed 120 North Vietnamese aircraft, killed 14 North Korean pilots, and created 20,000 Chinese support personnel casualties. Keep in mind that China and North Korea are communist countries that believed in the North Vietnamese cause. After that, I'd like to address a couple counter-arguments that say Rolling Thunder was a bad operation. The first is that there have been multiple estimates of anywhere in between 30,000 to 182,000 North Vietnamese civilians killed. The problem I see with that is 30,000 and 182,000 are massive differences. There isn't a single number that people can agree on, which makes these estimates less credible. People also don't talk about the fact that there was a high chance that some of these citizens that were killed could have been undercover military agents for North Vietnam, or these citizens were ready to kill Americans if they had the chance, meaning that not all of these people are innocent. Another argument is that the operation did not reach its goals, so it was a waste of time. It is true that Operation Rolling Thunder failed to meet its goals, as the number of troops entering the South increased over time, the bombings were graduated, and LBJ's negotiation pauses of the operation let the North Vietnamese rebuild their damaged equipment. But here is what I say. I say that over 300,000 bombings, 1 million tons of bombs dropped, 20,000 communists killed, 40,000 if you want to add the Chinese casualties, and tons of infrastructure and communication destroyed is better than 0 bombings with 0 bombs dropped, 0 communists killed, and no infrastructure and communication destroyed. Objectively, Rolling Thunder was a failure, but it is what I consider America's most badass failed operation because of the extraordinary number of bombs dropped and runs made for a single operation. It helped contribute to one of America's numerous bombing missions during Vietnam that helped end the war, with the total Vietnam bombings being 7.6 million tons of bombs dropped. Everything that I discussed is why I believe bombings were a great addition to the Vietnam War. This is all I have for part 1 of my presentation. Bombing communists in the Vietnam War was a good thing because they deserved it after all the horrible things they have done to their own people. I will be elaborating throughout this speech as to the horrible things they have done, so that you all will know that these people are evil and they deserved everything we gave them. Let's start off before the war. Before South and North Vietnam began fighting, Ho Chi Minh, the leader of North Vietnam, implemented a series of land reforms. The government would own all land while the people would share it all equally. From 1953 to 1956, his communistic policy violently seized thousands of landowners' privately owned lands, killing thousands in the process. Landlords and landowners were denounced. At least 15,000, many were supporters of the government, were executed and placed into labor camps. 1 million were victims of this communist program. This land reform had resistance, which included countryside riots. Land of anyone who was against communism or the Viet Minh would be confiscated. In 1956, Ho Chi Minh stopped this policy and released the prisoners, but in between 1956 and 1971, North Vietnam was still taking minor steps over the years to re-implement this collectivist policy to where it became huge in 1971, affecting almost all North Vietnamese farmers and eventually spreading to the south in 1975. A point system was introduced to workers to where they would receive points to turn into money for the quality and quantity of work they performed. This system became based only on the number of hours worked, with no recognition of quality. It was in 1975, during this program, where the least amount of rice was grown in Vietnam history and the least amount of people got fed. By the late 1970s, Vietnam was almost completely reliant on the Soviet Union for survival. Now let's talk about the Vietnam re-education camps, or prisons as any non-communist will call them. Vietnam re-education camps, prisons, came after Vietnam was united under one communist rule. These camps would re-educate, indoctrinate, many of the former South Vietnamese capitalists into how the new government works and why communism is correct. Anyone was sent to prison who was known or thought to have any American sympathy or anti-communist beliefs. 1 million people were detained in these camps. 165,000 died in them. The government said that these camps would go on for 10 to 14 days, but they went on for years, sometimes over 10 years. Many former prisoners who were interviewed said that they had been in 3 to 5 different re-education camps. Prisoners would do hard labor every day for hours. They would have to work on plantations, clear minefields without any equipment, so lots of people died and got injured in explosions, and have a lack of food and medicine. There was one South Vietnamese veteran who said his breakfast was just 90 kernels of corn every day in prison. Think of all the starving children! People would suffer from malaria, tuberculosis, and other various diseases. People who didn't perform well, whether due to thinking they could get away with it or a lack of food, got severely punished. Sometimes prisoners were sent to solitary confinement cells for not performing the normal mode of work expected towards them. Former prisoners reported frequent beatings for minor infractions such as missing work because of illness. Violations of rules led to various forms of punishment, including being tied up in contorted positions, shackled in dark cells, forced to work extra hours, or receiving reduced food rations. This work was done in the heat and sun. The poor health, combined with hard work, mandatory confessions, and political indoctrination, made life very difficult and contributed to a high death rate. There were some cases where camps were illegally being held after the 1980s reforms of removing these camps. For example, one lasted until the year 2000. Released prisoners were put on probation and placed under surveillance for 6 to 12 months. During that time, they had no official status, no exit visas, no access to government food rations, and no right to send their children to school. If the progress of the former prisoners was judged unsatisfactory during this period, they could lose their jobs, be put under further surveillance, or be sent back to the camps. The North Vietnamese would march into South Vietnamese villages and cities and kill anywhere in between 5 to 100% of the population in a day. One example of this is the Hue massacre. The massacre at Hue was a mass murder in the South Vietnamese city of Hue, where 2.8 to 6,000 innocent South Vietnamese civilians were tortured and killed, living their lives, minding their own business. This occurred on February 28, 1968. The communists killed all those people in one day. People would be buried alive after being tortured to make other people fear the communists for political support. The domino theory was another reason as to why we were fighting the North Vietnamese. The domino theory was cited by President Eisenhower in a news conference in 1954 for a reason as to why we should support direct military intervention in North Vietnam. What this theory is that once one country falls under communism, then others nearby will start to fall under communism and will continue as demonstrated by the diagram. The diagram shows how China falling under communism led to North Korea, then Vietnam, then Laos and Cambodia. The domino theory saw immediate effect as South Vietnam fell under communism in 1975, which its neighboring country of Cambodia did as well. In between 1975 to 1979, the Khmer Rouge, the Communist Party of the country, overthrew the Cambodian government and took control, led by the infamous Pol Pot. Pol Pot immediately started the horrific massacre known as the Killing Fields, or Cambodian genocide. In less than 4 years, nearly 1/3 of Cambodia's entire population was murdered by communists, along with being tortured, sent to prisons, and being punished with inhumane activities. This regime killed a higher proportion of its citizens than any other communist country in the 1900s. Bombing Vietnam helped end the war. Looking at President Richard Nixon's Operation Linebacker II, the objective was to destroy target complexes in and around the cities of Hanoi and Hue in North Vietnam. It was a maximum effort bombing campaign that lasted from December 18th to 29th, 1972. The U.S. destroyed and damaged around 1,600 military structures, 500 rail targets, including 872 pieces of rolling stock, 3 million gallons of fuel, estimated to be around a quarter of North Vietnam's reserves, and 10 airfields. It knocked out 80% of the electrical power production capacity. Some people who disagree with me on this being good say that civilians were killed, so it was a bad thing we did this. What they don't point out is that this was the final bombing blow to North Vietnam that convinced them that they should stop fighting because we're winning and we won't stop. This led to the Paris Peace Accords being signed less than a month after this operation. If we hadn't done this operation, then the Vietnam War would have continued for however long and killed hundreds of thousands of more people, possibly millions. That's much more tragic than the North Vietnamese government's estimate of 1,318 civilians being killed from this operation. This isn't the only time American bombings ended a war. In 1945, President Harry Truman authorized the atomic bomb droppings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 3 days after the second bomb dropped, Japan surrendered, and World War II ended. Those bombs caused an estimated 200,000 deaths among the citizens. If we didn't drop the atomic bombs in Japan, then it would have cost the world an estimated 1 million American lives and 5 million more Japanese lives from our only other option of the invasion of Japan. 200,000 people dead is a lot less tragic than 6 million dead. Today, Vietnam isn't as perfect as people often think it is. There is no freedom of assembly. Religion is restricted, monitored, and worship is subject to state approval. The government owns the press. Journalists and bloggers that speak against the government face censorship, imprisonment, intimidation, destruction of materials, cyber attacks, and the revoking of Vietnamese nationality with exile. Newspapers can be recalled. All this applies to any form of speech, including music, television, and public movies. Anti-communist art is censored. TV has a 10-minute delay for international channels to have any information the commies don't like being censored, such as the Vietnam or Cold War and events in China. Since 2019, it's illegal to criticize the government online, and anyone who does will have their user data given over by their ISPs. There were 5 journalists sent to prison for criticizing the government in 2021. Oh no, we won the Vietnam War in 1973, killing 1.1 million communists against our 58,000 American troops, which makes that a 19-to-1 kill-to-death ratio for the USA. If Congress didn't defund our commitment to South Vietnam in 1975, then the Vietnam War wouldn't have been lost. I hope by now you see the evils of the communists and have many reasons as to why we are fighting them, justifying the use of bombings against them. That's it for me.